This is a brief history of the history of art. I've noticed a gap in the curriculum. The history of European art is not usually explained at the beginning of art appreciation courses, and I think it's relevant to the images you will see in this course. So let's begin. Alright, I like to think of the French word histoire because it means history and it also means story. We can think of art history like a story. Another analogy for understanding art history can also be comparing it to a scientific theory in that both are mutable, changeable processes that get more accurate over time. These are the elements of art. The book includes a few more. Line, shape, color, value, form, texture, and space. These are basic categories that artists train in and cultivate. These categories are the principles of art. Artists take the elements like line, shape, and color, and they use them to make balance, emphasis, and rhythm. You can think of the principles of art as grammar, and that grammar is built upon by vocabulary. These principles of art are built by the elements of art. We are going to spend a lot of time on these concepts. They are what we will focus on in the first half of this course. Slowly they will make more sense and you will be able to see and identify when and how they are occurring. Let's talk about why the elements and principles of art are visually compelling. Look at this image. What do you see? Is it a work of art? Not really. Hopefully you see animal tracks in the dirt. Going back to hunter-gatherer times, our survival depended on noticing these signs in the landscape. Our need to eat and not be eaten systematically trained our eyes to notice the very same qualities that artists presently employ in art. If I were to describe this image artistically, I would say it has focal points, contrast, and shapes that are unique for the background. I need to recognize those features to find something to eat, to stay alive, and because of those experiences, my eyes and brain are hardwired to notice these aesthetic qualities. Let's look at this image. The stakes are higher. There's a large cat in the grass, and it takes a few seconds to notice that. At any given point in time, you might be eating this creature, or this creature might be eating you. Evolutions in biology and culture have trained us to recognize slight differences in pattern, contrast, lines, and shapes. Here, the leopard is well camouflaged, but we can notice him by the slight difference in contrast, and even though we don't see all of him, our mind creates an implied shape of a cat because we see the silhouette line of his head and shoulder through the grass. To answer the question above, at some point in history our lives depended on observing these qualities in the wild. Artists aren't constantly trying to invoke our fight or flight response. Rather, they are using our ability to visually identify variations, uniqueness, and change in our field of vision to communicate whatever meaning they intend to communicate. That's a pretty clever thing, and it didn't just start recently. Artists have been doing that for thousands of years, starting when we were all hunter-gatherer cultures out in the wilderness. Let's start the story of art there, out in the wilderness. This period is known as prehistory. It's called prehistory because there are no written records of this time, so our understanding of these objects comes from the archaeological record. Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and other bipedal primates were making jewelry, stone tools, and painting cave walls. I'd like to mention that the roots of abstract art are from this time period. We sometimes now think of abstraction as a modern European invention, but that's absolutely false. Humans have been creating abstract images and patterns for thousands of years. The humans of these times were highly nomadic, moving with the seasons and following prey animals. Much of this artwork was ceremonially used to honor astronomical and seasonal events. They survived against impressive odds, and the fact that we are alive today is proof of how accomplished they were. Slowly, agrarian lifestyles and small settled communities emerged. We now call these city-states because a small locality usually held political and cultural power over a wide region. For the Western world, a lot of these political locales arose and declined around the Mediterranean Sea. It's shallow and warm and easy to sail on. This was the place the ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans and the Near Asian cultures all had their influence at various times. Much of this artwork was political propaganda for these city-states. They were very vulnerable to crop failure, flooding, warfare, and disease. Their fortunes rose and fell frequently, though there are some pretty cool things that came out of this period. Geometry starts to show up strong in architecture as a way to really define itself from the landscape. Also, realism and observations of nature to accurately recreate human and animal forms became important, and those are still with us today. This is the medieval period. It gets dated precisely to 476 CE because this was the year that Rome completely succumbed to the repeated raids of the Germanic tribes. But Christianity, originating in Roman rule, remained a dominant force in European culture, and a little later on, Islam became the main religion of the Near East and Persia, both having the similar effect that much of the artwork of this time was iconic, religiously devotional imagery. In line with other religious themes, this was the time of handwritten, illuminated manuscripts in both European and Arabic cultures, and the great cathedrals of Europe were being built. More or less, this goes on for about 1,000 years. The Renaissance. We've all heard this word. We know basically what it means, something cool. Well, it's a French word that means rebirth, and it didn't really get commonly used until the 1800s. It's generally taught that the Renaissance started in Florence, Italy in the 1400s. That's more or less true, though other influences include Catholic monasteries throughout Europe that had become powerful educational centers, and well-educated Greek refugees fleeing Constantinople at that time. The Renaissance is a rebirth of the ideas of classic Greek philosophy, culture, and learning. The effect was that while art might still be religious, it wasn't necessarily iconic, and Greek mythology re-emerged as an inspiring source of subject matter for artists. Other results were that mathematics and technological innovations improved, so linear perspective gets developed. On the top left, you can see Raphael is able to systematically put together techniques to create depth. Also, the printing press is invented, and that's huge because suddenly more people have access to books and learning. Cathedrals keep getting built and they keep getting bigger. These things take hundreds of years to make, and they are massive compared to every other structure around them. They won't really be rivaled in size until steel becomes a component of skyscrapers in the late 1800s. These three styles often get lumped together, for better or worse. They are different from each other, but you can see by the three examples that the differences are subtle. The Renaissance focus on rational thought, technology, and science carries forward over the next few hundred years. Thus, there is a steady progression in philosophical movements like humanism, rationalism, and confidence in the scientific method as a way to prove hypotheses with direct observations of nature. All of these philosophies are what motivates the Protestant and democratic revolutions of these times. The results for artists are more depictions of ordinary, upper-class ordinary people, and classic Greek mythology becomes a way to romanticize existence and honor human subjective experience. In these three paintings, you can see the individual humanity of the subjects being depicted. They are allowed and even idealized for their impassioned, fragile, individual yearnings. We think of such personal freedom as a contemporary experience, but the roots of modern thought go back hundreds of years. On the left, Caravaggio's depiction of Narcissus is a romanticized and tragic telling of this myth. The boy cannot help but be transfixed by his own image, and the sincerity of his gaze challenges us as viewers not to judge him for his faults. The middle image of the lady on a swing is not as innocent as the first glance of sunlight reveals. The implications of the shadowy men pulling the ropes and the statue on the left telling us all to be silent speaks volumes. We also have all the strong foliage in the background, looming heavily above the main subject matter. The content is benign, but the meaning communicated by the arrangement of lines and shapes foreshadows the brooding social unrest that marks France as a burgeoning locale for democratic revolt. By the time we get to the image on the right, it's easier to comprehend the progression in thought over this time span. Jean-Baptiste Bellay is depicted with uncommon swagger for his time. Bellay was a former slave who became a French politician in an era when the slave trade from Africa to North America was a professional enterprise. Bellay's posture is confident and relaxed. He is gazing into and beyond the artificial hierarchies of his society. That presentation of individual self-confidence was an emerging psychological feature of these times. The term modern came into vogue in the 1860s, when democracy firmed up in France and the Industrial Revolution really reached a climax, a point of no return. Factories became much more numerous and large. People were forced through economic need to migrate to urban areas. Again, this is all happening in the mid-1800s. Artists adjusted to the turbulence of urban life and industrial developments by embracing abstraction, personal expression, and social criticism in their art practices. As well, the invention of the camera and its ability to make exact images spurred artists away from making realistic paintings, thus furthering the artistic embrace of abstraction as a way to distinguish themselves from photography. A lot of the big changes in art were happening around Paris in the late 1800s. Impressionism and Post-Impressionism would go on to have lasting, international influence on the art movements of the 20th century. Into the early 1900s, Paris continues to be the art capital of the world until the Nazis sack it in 1940. After World War II, New York becomes the art center of the world, though the ideas of abstraction, personal expression, and social commentary developed in 1800s France only get stronger in the 20th century. The terms modernism, postmodernism, post-colonialism, and conceptual art dominate aesthetic discourse of the 20th century. Postmodernism seeks to include more cultural diversity than modernism allowed. Post-colonialism is the philosophy that we are living in a post-colonial world, which is true in that most of the European countries that held colonial empires lost them during or immediately after World War II. Conceptual art is any art that values the communication of an idea more than the art object that communicates it. The combined results of all these thoughts is that anything and everything comes to be considered art. Traditional ideas of beauty take a back seat, and personal expression as well as social criticism become heightened. We've entered the 21st century on the artistic coattails of the late 20th century. We are still living with the notion that the viewer's subjective experience is more valuable than any object made by the artist. That is based on 20th century philosophical movements such as existentialism and postmodernism, leading to installation and performance art where artists utilize existing spaces, public monuments, or their own bodies and the cause of beauty or social action, and none of us are untouched by the digital era. On the top right, April Grieman was one of the first people to use computer-aided design in the 1980s. By her accounts, most artists and designers of her time did not want to use computers. Now, digital design and computer-aided drawing dominate media industries. That's the end of the history, and this is the last slide. We're in the present moment, and I want to mention a few more things. The first is that this world is filled with artistic wonders made by many cultures in different times all around this world. This image speaks to that. It was made in Central America before the en masse arrival of Europeans. This object was not made out of necessity. The Mayans made this without metal tools. They fashioned it the same way they made arrowheads, carefully striking those pieces of flint with antlers and stone tools to knock off flakes until the form they wanted was revealed. I don't think there is a human on the planet today that could fashion this object by those traditional techniques. Its sharp edges, mythological storytelling, and ritual usage are a powerful testament to the marvels of this world. That a human can produce an object whose existence expresses so much reverence and beauty for life. Philosophies, modes of conscious thought, whether they are religious or secular, have always been in the pursuit of truth, beauty, and honor. I think human creativity is a part of that process. Understanding and making art can bring us into the wonder of being alive. I look forward to continuing these conversations with you throughout this course.